Oh yes, this is great. I love how this turned out. So if you guys were wondering, I've been scrap busting like crazy. I have all these cool linens in my stash and I didn't know what to do with them. So I came up with this pattern. It's called the adventure shirt. And this one is the version with patch pockets. It has lots of different pattern pieces and is really great for these color blocking, scrap busting, patchworking kind of looks. So I have prepared all my pieces last night. Let's dig right in and start with the front. The vertical cut and sew. That's the side piece plus the center piece. So gonna pin them together right sides facing because we're just gonna do open seams, sew and serge, 1.5 cm seam allowance. So now let's bring this to the overlock. Americans call it the serger. And let's serge both raw edges at the same time. And I went for a shocking neon orange. I really like it. And I kept the stitches very tight. So it doesn't really look like overlock. It's more like a kind of solid neon bar, which is pretty dope. So let's iron this a little bit. Let's press it. And we don't have to press it open because the seam is kind of closed like this. We just press the seam to the side. Voila. And now I want to top stitch the whole thing just to give it a little bit of structure and to keep that seam allowance where it is. So once we're done, quick press. And now it's time for the front yoke. Grab the yoke pieces and with the right sides facing, we want to pin them to the lower front that we've just assembled. And then 1.5 cm, 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And we also want to overlock the raw edges, just like we did with the vertical cut and sew, and then give it a quick top stitch. And now we're ready for the front patch pockets. So I have my pocket pieces here, and the first thing that I actually want to do is mark the seam allowance. I find it much easier like this. So there's 1 cm all around, and then there's 1.5 at the top. So I want to fold the first 0.5 towards the wrong side, and then another 1 cm towards the wrong side, and that's my top hem. And now I'm gonna fold the corners first to miter the edges. I don't know if you guys can see that. So 45-degree for the corners. And then I fold the sides and the bottom over that. And I get these really pretty mitered corners. If you have a hard time with this, you can try some spray starch. That usually works quite well. So press it, do the other one. And now we wanna finish the top edge first. So you can do that from the wrong side and just edge stitch along the top edge there. Another one. And then we want to place them on our main front. And you can use the original notches for the concealed pockets as a guide. And then I also like to overlap them a little bit over the horizontal cut and sew line. And then I'm stitching first an edge stitch. Start in one corner, very close to the edge, all the way around. And then you could now just do a little triangle or back tack or whatever, but I wanna go back where I came from, just like this, with a parallel top stitch for a bit of a more casual shirt finish, a bit more graphic, and I quite like it. So just did the other one real quick, and now we're gonna press them and make them all kind of sink into the front. So now we can take care of the back. And first things first, there is pretty much the same vertical cut and sew seam. So we have our center back and our side pieces. And with the right sides facing, I'm going to pin the sides to the center. And now 1.5 cm seam allowance, 5/8 of an inch. And let's overlock this just as well. And our back is done. So that is pretty quick. So, and now it is time for the back yoke and burrito method. We have our back main piece and our two yoke pieces, and one is for the outside and one is for the inside, and the orange one will be on the outside. That's gonna be the one that you can see. And now I have my second yoke, which is this tan color, and this one's gonna be on the inside, so it goes underneath there. It basically faces the wrong side of our main back piece. And now let's make a neat little sandwich: yoke, back, yoke, and let's pin them in place. So put as many pins as you like, and now let's sew it all together with 1 cm, 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So now we can give this a quick press to make it all flat and neat. Let the inside yoke drop to the back, and now we pin our front panels to only the outside yoke with the right sides facing. And now let's roll the back and the front pieces together. And this is what we call the burrito style now. So we roll it, and now you can see the inside yoke there. Bring it all the way around. And now we want to pin this yoke to the other two layers. So we have our triple sandwich again. Now we can bring it over to the machine and sew it with 1 cm, 3/8 of an inch seam allowance as well. Okay, so here's the burrito, and now let's fiddle out the back and the two front panels through the kind of neckline there. And it's actually just the back of the neck. So I want to give it all a quick press. I'm just finger pressing. It's linen, it's super convenient. And then the body of my shirt is pretty much done. Now I have the curves there. I have my arm skies, my armholes, and also my neckline. So what I want to do is a stay stitch. So I want to stitch along the raw edge with a very big stitch length, something like 4 or 5, and 1/4 of an inch, 0.5 cm seam allowance. This is just to stabilize the curves so they don't stretch out and become all messy. Because now it's time to assemble and attach the sleeves. So first things first, there's a horizontal cut and sew line which connects the crown and the centerpiece of the sleeve. So right sides facing, 1.5 cm seam allowance, and let's get this party started. So now let's bring those two over to the overlock and finish the raw edges both in one go. Back to the table, I want to give them a quick press, and I'm pressing the seam allowance downwards. And now let's also add a top stitch to keep it all nice and flat. Let's take care of the next step, which is the vertical cut and sew and the placket. So this is a little bit different. Here I want to overlock both raw edges separately. And there are also notches on the side piece, so make sure you don't lose them. They're all overlocked now, and let's, with the right side facing, pin them together. We want to start at the first notch, which is the one here, corresponding to the horizontal cut and sew line, and then there's the lower notch there, which is the one that marks the placket opening, and then all the way to the top. And you can see how the seam allowances kind of cross there, and that's totally normal that there's a little triangle sticking out. Let's repeat this one for the other side, and then we can bring it over to the machine and stitch exactly from the top to the notch, and start exactly there where the seam allowances kind of cross and meet. All the way down to the notch, and then reverse well with a couple of back stitches. Good, we got it back at the table, and now let's press the vertical cut and sew seam open. I just do it by hand real quick. And now let's take care of the placket. This one is really simple. We're just going to fold our seam allowance, and the first fold is 0.506 cm, something like this, which is basically the overlock. And then we fold it again so the overlock is gone. And you do it all the way up to the top there, and maybe a little bit more, 1.5 cm on top of the placket, which is like kind of 3 to 5/8 of an inch. Pin it well. One more up there. And now let's top stitch, or like edge stitch, from the wrong side all the way around. So I start at one edge, and you can see the overlock popping through. It's kind of cute, actually. I like it. And once we reach the top, we can go straight, or we make a little kind of triangle like a house, and to the other side and back down. And this is our placket. If you want, you can add kind of a bar tack up there, or a couple of hand stitches to make it stronger, but generally speaking, it's kind of fine like this. So I'm doing one more, the other sleeve, quickly there by myself. And now we can attach the sleeves to our bodice. Connecting is pretty easy. So the horizontal cut and sew on the back of the shirt corresponds to the vertical cut and sew on the sleeve, etc. And there's a little bit of gathering there on the yoke and top of the sleeve area, but you just go one by one, notch by notch, and fill the space in between. So if the sleeve is a little bit bigger than the armhole, we just pin, pin, pin until we have distributed the extra volume there smoothly. And it's actually necessary that the sleeve is just like a tad bit bigger than the armhole to make it look nice. One sleeve down. Now let's do the next one, and then we can sew the whole thing with 1.5 cm seam allowance. Ideally, you want to have the sleeve on the bottom and the bodice on top, because the sleeve is a little bit bigger, and easing in, that's what we call this, works much easier if the longer part is down below, because then our feeder dogs kind of take care of easing for us. But always double check if you got like accidental little pleats, something like this always happens. So let's bring this over to the overlock and clean up the raw edges. Again, both at the same time for a clean and flat finish. Once the edges are all nice, we can bring it all over to the table and press the seam allowance. I am pressing it towards the sleeve. And once it's all nice and flat, we can top stitch everything in place. Now, the side seams are ready. So what we want to do first is overlock the sides, and including the sleeves. So that's a lot of overlocking. Let's do this. The whole thing in one go. So here we are, and now with the right side spacing, let's pin the side seams together without further ado and line up the seams, and you're good. So let's bring our shirt over to the sewing machine and stitch the side seams with 1.5 cm 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Speed that up a little bit, it's gonna take forever. Let's clean this all up a little bit. And actually, this is the perfect moment for a quick little fit check. It's not like I'm already wearing an adventure shirt there, but it's always good to fit this one. I really like how it falls. And okay, let's do the hem. And yeah, this design, it's not the last step. It's just somewhere in the middle because there's still a button placket and stuff. So let's mark the hem. I really like marking things. It makes it so much easier and makes me work so much more precise. So first one is 1 cm, second one is 2 cm. The total hem allowance is 3 cm. So before I fold everything, I actually want to reduce my seam allowance there. I want to cut off the overlock bits on the 2 cm part, which is kind of the facing of our hem. So I'm cutting it all away whilst folding the first cm, the first 3/8 of an inch towards the wrong side. And this makes it overall much nicer, flatter, and makes the hem kind of easy and more commercial looking too. So after fixing it with a bit of heat and steam, I now want to fold the second part, which is 2 cm, and I'm also pinning it in place. Now I want to edge stitch from the inside of the garment all along the hem. Okay, back at the table, we want to give everything a good press. Because now it is time for the button placket. And the button placket, a piece, needs to be cut 4 times. And I have 2 in dark orange and 2 in this brighter orange. So I'm making 2 little pairs there. And then I want to pin them together. It's always a light orange and a dark orange one. And actually the top stays open and one is right side, one is left side. So we pin one on the right side and we pin one on the left side. So over at the machine, I want to give it a quick stitch and 1 cm seam allowance, and we pivot at the bottom and we close the bottom too. Just the top stays open. So now let's bring them over to the table, and first things first, let's snip off the little corners down there at the bottom and press everything open and turn it right sides out. I'm using a pencil to kind of get the point nice. And now it's time to attach our placket to our shirt. So let's grab some pins. And I actually like to start with the bottom, and we want to line everything up really nicely. So you get the seam allowance a little bit out there and you line it all up. And then I'm going to pin the top and then everything in between like this. The placket's going to be nice and everything fits well. So open it up a little bit so you can start right at the little bottom seam of the placket, 1 cm seam allowance, and that seam has to be lined up with the bottom of the hem, so it's all going to be one continuous line. And then just 1 cm seam allowance, 3/8 of an inch all the way to the top. And one more time. Yeah. Do you want to go outside or? So back at the table, and now let's press this baby in shape, and the seam allowance goes into the placket, so away from the bodice. One raw edge left, and that one we want to fold towards the inside. 1 cm seam allowance, and see me there marking it real quick. I really like it this way. What you want to do is actually slightly overlap the existing stitches like this. We make sure that once we top stitch from the right side, we catch everything on the wrong side. So throw in a couple of pins, and if you need to, you can also clean up the corner down there, remove a little bit of the seam allowance to make it all nice, flat and neat. So I have done the other side real quick, and now it's time to sew. And I want to top stitch this from the right side. What I haven't shown you guys is that I've actually swapped around the pins, so they're actually on the right side now. I cut that out because it took a bit, and yeah, it just makes it much easier to stitch it from the right side, obviously. So now let's take care of one of the finer details, namely the collar. And actually we have two collars. We have one on the inside and one on the outside. And it's actually the inside one that is showing. So before I start sewing them together, I want to check my notches. There are a few of them, and you want to have them really nice and clean so you can find them later. So I've just re-notched it, and now just put them on top of each other, and we want to sew the sides and the top. Oh yeah, and I'm talking about the right sides facing here, of course. So now let's sew them together with 1 cm seam allowance, 3/8 of an inch. And be very careful to properly pivot in the corners and in the points. You can mark with a pencil or some chalk the exact pivot point, and that makes it so much easier. I actually place my pins exactly where I'm supposed to pivot. One great tip for the curves is to actually reduce the stitch length, and like this it's a little bit slower and you have more flexibility. So back to the table, and first things first, we want to snip off our points and reduce the seam allowance on the sides of them as well. And then I also cut out little pizza slices from the curved areas. Like this, the seam allowance will not overlap itself on the inside and create kind of ugly bulking. Now, let's give it a quick finger press or a real press with an iron, depending on the fabric. And then we want to flip it outsides out. You can use like a little tool, pencil, something to get the points nice and neat. It's really important to get it all nice and flat and get the sides really on top of each other. And then we can attach the collar to the bodies. So the tan side goes to the bodies with the right sides facing, and then simply notch by notch from the center. I actually like to kind of work both sides at the same time. Like this, we get it nice and even. So once we have that, we can sew it with 1 cm seam allowance. Here you can see how I've really neatly lined up the placket edge with the edge of the collar. So let's clean it all up, reduce the seam allowance a little bit, and then let's press the seam allowance into the collar. So, and now I want to take the raw edge of my orange collar and fold it in by 1 cm. It's a little bit blurry, sorry. So again, 1 cm seam allowance, I fold that in, and then I also overlap the original stitches there a little bit. At the same time, I'm still reducing the bulk. And now just kind of notch by notch, folding it in, pinning it over the existing stitches. So as many pins as you need, and then we can bring it over to the sewing machine. And I want to top stitch it now. It's basically from the wrong side of the garment. And if you want a super clean finish, you can also do this by hand or pin it the other way around and top stitch it from the outside of the garment. It all works. It's different levels of pretty, so to say. Now, quick fit check, and this looks so good. The last step now, the cuffs. So there are two easy rectangles, and what I want to do is just fold them in half and throw a little pin. So right side's facing. Then I'm bringing them over to the machine now, and all we're gonna do is close the sides. So 1 cm seam allowance, reverse it well, and let's do this. And if you're wondering, I didn't use any interfacing for this shirt, but you could possibly interface the cuffs, the collar, and the front placket. So back at the table, let's flip them right sides out and give them a little press by hand or with the iron, up to you. Now it's time to attach the cuffs to the sleeves, and the cuffs are a lot smaller than the sleeves, so we either gather or pleat, and in this case I want to pleat. And I'm also pinning it to the wrong side. It's just a preference. You can either pin it wrong side first or right side first. And then I start at both ends, so fix the ends first, and then I gently push the extra volume towards the bigger piece, so towards the kind of center piece, and create my pleat around 1 cm from the edge. So this is for now, and then I'm gonna do the other side as well. Again, start basically on both sides, pin it a little bit, and then move all the volume towards the big centerpiece edge and create that pleat. And I want to sort of get the pleats right and symmetrical, so I open the other one again, and now I'm just kind of folding them until they look nice. It looks a bit trickier than it actually is. It's sort of easy. It's just a pleat. Once that's done, we are going to stitch it with 1 cm seam allowance. One more time. So now let's press it a little bit. All that seam allowance goes into the cuff. So let's get that all nice and neat. And then we can fold in the 1 cm on the raw edge, match that up with the stitches, overlapping the stitches a little bit and throwing in a couple of pins to hold that down. Now I'm top stitching it all in place. And why did I start with the wrong side? Because now my final stitch is the top stitch on the right side, and I basically have full control over what it looks like. So guys, now buttonholes and buttons. I'm not going too deep into this because it's very tedious, takes a long time, and it's kind of tricky, and every sewing machine is different. So I have this cool ruler which is kind of for armholes, but it also has templates for buttonholes. So I'm using this, and you choose right over left, left over right. I'm doing them automatic here with the kind of semi-automatic foot. And then I'm also sewing my buttons with a special button presser foot, which I really adore. I'm super bad at hand stitching buttons. People always judge me for using the presser foot, but the results are pretty nice. So guys, what do you think? How do you like it? Oh, and have I mentioned, please like, subscribe, and leave me a comment if you like. You can find the pattern in my shop, Tropical Research, and check out my website, tobiasconrad.com. Thank you so much for tuning in. This was a bit of a faster format again. My videos before were super long and nobody really watches them. So please, guys, watch, share, tell your family and friends. Thank you so much. Toby, bye-bye.